He died outside the city and he was buried in an anonymous graveyard until it was miraculously discovered when Sulaiman al-Fatih opened it. The fact of the matter, you want my academic opinion, this is not the actual grave of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, the one that they claim to be. It is simply, anyway, that's besides the point. I don't sugarcoat the reality. This is just something that the Ottomans did to shore up PR, to make people like feel that they have something. But in reality, nobody knows where Abu Ayyub is buried. Who's going to have marked the grave? How would they have known for 1,000 years? Anyway, that's besides the point. Abu Ayyub al-Ansari's grave is somewhere. All I'm saying is the grave that they say that it is actually, look it up historically, it is simply constructed later on in history. The point being that the Sahaba attempted to conquer Constantinople and their eyes were on the prize. Many ulama and historians have said that Tariq ibn Ziyad, actually his main intention for going to Andalus was to make his way by land, because he knew that by sea would not be possible because reinforcements, etc. He wanted to conquer land by land until he goes from North Africa to Andalus all the way to Constantinople. Some have presumed this and Allah knows best. The point is, the eyes were on the prize. Many people wanted to conquer Constantinople, but of course it only happened in the year, who knows what year Constantinople was conquered? What year? 1453 by Mahmud or Muhammad al-Fatih, by Sultan Mahmud al-Fatih. The Turks say al-Fatih Mahmud. And the conquest of Constantinople changed the course of human history. It marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. Literally one of, if you wanted to list the 10 most famous incidents in all of human history, the conquest of Constantinople is in the top 5. It's that big of a deal that the Muslims finally conquered Constantinople, and this was predicted by our Prophet ﷺ. Hadith is in Sahih Muslim that a Sahabi asked Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, one of the Tabi'un, asked him that which one will we conquer first, Constantinople or Rome? They had heard of Rome. Rome was there, but Rome was not to the power and the level of Constantinople. It was far number 2. And so he said, bring me my book. So they opened up his book, because Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, he would write a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and his eyes were failing. He looked it up and he wanted to refresh his memory, and he said, no, the Prophet ﷺ predicted that we would conquer Constantinople before Rome. And subhanAllah, Constantinople 1453. And in all likelihood, the other lands that are mentioned will be done during the time of the Mahdi, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. Now, there is a cryptic prediction about Constantinople that kind of sort of throws a spanner in the works. It kind of is difficult to understand. And I'll mention it to you, and let's see if we can get some understanding and leave the rest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we talked about the Mahdi on last Saturday, I had mentioned that some ahadith seem to mention that the Mahdi will conquer Jerusalem and also Constantinople. Okay, and that is somewhat problematic because Constantinople has already been conquered and the Mahdi wasn't there. And the explicit, authentic hadith in Sahih Muslim tells us the mechanism via which Constantinople will be conquered. And that is that the Muslims will lay siege for a long time, and they will fall short of supplies, and the himma will be going down until finally they will say, let us do dhikr of Allah loudly, and we will conquer Constantinople via dhikr. And so they will begin chanting the tasbih and takbir and tahmeed, and eventually the walls of the city will begin to shake and the walls will collapse because of the dhikr of the Muslims. Now that did not happen in 1453. In 1453, it was an all-out siege. Mahmud al-Fatih, he threw in the troops, the navy, the army, he threw in everything. He laid siege for a number of times. Even the Ottomans tried multiple times. And by the way, one of the reasons the Ottomans could then demand from the Abbasids hand over the Khilafah, the Abbasids had gone down weak because of the Mongol invasion. They had to flee to the Mamluk Egypt, and the Ottomans, after they conquered Constantinople, they then felt confident enough to say, okay, you guys, you're no longer qualified to be the Khalifa, we can be the Khalifa. So there was a ceremony in which the last of the Abbasids symbolically handed his cloak and his turban to the first of the Ottoman Khalifas. That actually took place, an actual ceremony. When did it take place? after the conquest of Constantinople. Even though the Turks go back to 1300, the Ottomans go back to 1300, but they didn't feel confident enough to say to the Khalifa, make us the Khalifa, until they had the prize, until they had the silver platter with the city on it, and that is Constantinople. And of course, as you all know, they changed the name to Istanbul, and that is why if you go to Istanbul, and inshallah I'll be doing that next year as well, if you want to come with the academic tour, there's so much history to see, so much history to see. You can see Christian history, you can see Roman history, you can see Muslim history, you can see so much in that city. It goes back so many years, and the eras of human civilization overlap. So how do we understand that hadith? In another hadith we learn that Constantinople will be conquered by 70,000 children of Ishaq, the children of Isaac, will help conquer Constantinople. How do we understand this? Allah knows best. But it appears this is talking about another conquest towards the end of times. It appears that a time will come where that land will no longer be considered a part of the lands of Islam. That's not the case right now. But something might happen that those lands are no longer considered the lands of Islam. And so once again there will have to be a reconquest. And so this hadith that talks about 70,000 of the children of Ishaq. Who are the children of Ishaq? The Arabs would call the Romans children of Ishaq. And this hadith predicts that there will be many Western people, because Rome is the Western land, who will convert to Islam and who will be on the side of the Mahdi and who will be fighting on the side of the truth, and they will then be reconquering Constantinople from whoever else it is. And at that point in time they will use the dhikr of Allah as a weapon. And the dhikr of Allah, there will not be violence, there will not be bloodshed. They will simply say Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, and the dhikr will go louder and louder until, as a miracle from Allah, the walls of the city will collapse and they will simply walk in and conquer the city without any bloodshed. This is something that didn't happen in 1453. So clearly, therefore, there will be another conquering of Constantinople towards the end of times, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Another prediction, and this could be a trend and it could be a specific incident, Allah knows best, but we are all aware of one of the most amazing predictions that we now see in front of us in our own lifetime, and that is the prediction that in the Arabian Peninsula there shall be higher and higher buildings. In the Arabian Peninsula, there shall be skyscrapers. And this is something that, again, who could have ever imagined? We need to understand, when Islam came to Arabia, the Arabian people were of the most backward in the world. They did not even have government. They were tribal. You know, the basic sign of civilization is government. They didn't have a government. They didn't have a codified language. They did not have a script. The script was developed after Islam. There was not a single library in all of Arabia. There was no 3-story structure. Didn't exist. The max you could do 2 stories, very small. They couldn't build tall buildings. That's why even when they had any type of technology, they're bringing it from outside, because they're not any technological advance. They would import their swords from India. That's why the hadith mentions Indian swords. They would import their armor from Byzantine. They would import their cloth from Yemen. The Arabs did not have that level of civilization that other lands had. So for the Prophet ﷺ to predict that Arabia and the Arab lands would have the tallest buildings is once again surreal. How could that happen? And not just that, but people who were only yesterday dirt poor would be competing with one another to who is going to build a taller building. And I don't need to go into explicit detail. Wallahi, this is self-evident as we speak. These oil-rich families that control that part of the world, their own rulers were born in poverty. Listen to the interviews of the senior princes, those that are still alive. They tell us, look at their YouTube videos, when their own fathers came to power, and back in the 20s and 30s, they weren't rich, there wasn't oil back then. These same princes mentioned they didn't have running water, they didn't have shoes and slippers, they would run around in the sand. And what did our Prophet ﷺ say?